one thing to note, when you finish your degree, I know it's daunting when you're applying for jobs or just searching for what to do next after your degree. Obviously, architecture in the UK has its own format in terms of how you get experience, how you log experience, and how much experience you need to actually eventually apply to do your part 3. But the one thing I'll tell you is that make sure you have a digital portfolio and a physical one that's made before your interviews. Don't start rushing to make a physical portfolio a week or the day before you actually hear that you've got an interview. Make sure you're off the bat, when you finish your degree, you actually have a physical portfolio that's chronologically ordered and actually shows off your CAD skills. Because the reality of it is, the architectural practices, the extension companies, they only care if you can actually use AutoCAD, use Rivet. So make sure that you actually display those works. And yes, you can do hand drawings, but in reality, in the workforce, you're going to be used as a CAD monkey. You're going to just be churning out drawings. So you need to be able to show that you can actually use AutoCAD. One other thing to be aware of is that when you're coming to interviews, make sure you're professionally dressed, make sure that you actually bring your portfolio, make sure you've actually looked through your portfolio and you know what's in there, and make sure you actually bring models. I was quite lucky that I've been in a position where I've been interviewed and also been the interviewee. When I was being interviewed, the key thing that they said to me afterwards when I got feedback was that they loved that I brought models because it allowed them to have something physical to touch. Because the reality of it is actually most extension companies or architectural practices, it's rare for them to actually make a lot of models themselves. Most of it is either paid to, say, a 3D model making company to actually then make the model. So it's really a winning point if you can actually bring models, because you'll stand out from the audience really and the bunch that are actually applying for the same position as you. So I actually found it quite difficult when I was applying for jobs because I actually wanted to work for the big architectural practices, the Norman Fosters, the Richard Rogers. And what I didn't realize was actually there's a lot more other companies within the architectural banner, basically. So there's project management roles, there's extension companies, as well as the architectural practices. And what you find is that it's actually better to actually apply for smaller practices because you learn a lot more when you're working with them. And you find that they're more likely to not just treat you as a CAD monkey, but actually want to invest in you, whether it's allowing you to study and your master's part-time or go further to actually go on site and actually see the whole design process basically for a client instead of actually never seeing a client. The reason why I found it quite difficult was it was just really hard. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't know that actually they didn't really care about all the additional documentation you add. All they care about really, what I realized in the end was that you've completed your degree, your CV is almost one page with everything on it, and that you actually apply at the right time when they're actually hiring. Because a lot of companies, they don't spend all year hiring. What you find is that there's specific times of the year where they're always looking for graduates. So the key thing is that, yes, you can apply to all the companies, but you need to make sure that you're applying at the right time. Obviously, you're going to be applying when you finish and you've just graduated, say in June or July. But also just bear in mind that actually you might end up waiting maybe about 4 months into maybe some companies are hiring in January or in December. So that's just something to be aware of. Don't panic. It does take a long time to actually get your first job because maybe you might not have no experience. But if you've taken my advice in my previous video, make sure during the summer times, you're actually in between, you're actually spending 4 months or 2 months or a few weeks actually working for free in some architectural practices, because then that will allow you to be able to say, actually, I have worked in a work environment. You're not, taking me from scratch and having to train me up. Actually, I have done certain items that you probably will be doing in your company. How did you apply to practices? Most architectural practices, what you tend to find is that they'll Either you can do it through sending your CV via email, or you actually have a portal that you actually upload your portfolio or documents to, or they'll prefer that you send, say, a hard copy by post. What I tend to find is that actually it's good to do all forms, send it by post, do it online. But remember, if you are posting your portfolio or your CV to hundreds of practices in London, you're going to spend a lot of money. So what I tend to find is that you strategically attack certain companies that are actually hiring. So what you'll find is that give them a call, ask if the position is still available, because some architectural practices, what they tend to find is that they put a role up online, but it's still going to be on there, a month or 2 months after they've already hired someone. So instead of wasting your efforts, give them a call, find out if they're still hiring, and then send through your actual CV to them. Find out who actually deals with it. With smaller companies, you tend to find actually it might be the manager that's actually dealing with everything instead of a specific admin or HR team. So one question I always get asked is, how do I conduct myself when I actually get the job? So one thing to always be aware of is that you're being assessed every day, every week, every month that you're at the workplace, from the person that's hired you, or from the architect, or from other surrounding colleagues. So one thing is to always be punctual, always be on time, be at your desk dead on 9 or 10 whenever you're meant to start. Make sure that you leave on time, so you leave at 5 p.m. or at 6 p.m. So when I mean leave, I don't mean start packing up 10 minutes or 20 minutes before 6 p.m. Once it hits 6, you stop doing work, or once it hits 5, you stop doing work, and then you start packing away. Another thing to always be aware of is avoid being rude. It's very easy to be quite relaxed when you have like payday drinks, or there's an event at work, you're drinking alcohol, everybody's quite comfortable and relaxed with you, but always be aware that they're assessing you even when it's during lunchtime, or even when it's like during an event or payday drinks. One other thing to be aware of is how you dress. Find out very early on what the dress code is and make sure you stick to it. Don't deliberately wear clothing that will make others feel uncomfortable. And always be prepared that you might meet a client. It goes without saying, but you need to make sure you're working hard. Always ask questions if you don't know what you're doing, and the people that always ask the most questions always get their job done well. And yes, it's one thing to ask questions, but once you've asked the question, say 2 or 3 times, just actually learn it, or take a book with you whenever you're about to ask the question to, say, the architect or your superior or a colleague, and actually write down what they've told you, so you don't have to continuously come back. But it's always best practice to always ask if you don't know, so that you don't have to do the work twice because you made a mistake. So one other question I get asked commonly is, how do I bank my PEDRs? What are they? And how much experience do I need? Who needs to sign them off? Is my university involved? And do I need to get a mentor? So typically most universities, when you've graduated from your degree, will explain this process to you. So typically you need 2 years worth of experience before you can actually sit your Part 3 exam, which is the final qualification you need to become an architect. Typically 1 year of that work experience can be with anyone in the construction industry. So it could be a project manager, it could be a builder, it could be an architect even. But the second year of your work experience actually needs to be with a qualified architect, or you might have to find someone that could actually come in and actually observe what you're doing from time to time. Typically, if you're working in an architectural practice, there'll be a lead architect who can actually sign off the final year. You will have someone in your university actually who will actually be observing what you're actually filling in for your actual PEDR. So there is a recording system where you're actually entering what you're doing from day to day, basically. And you log it every 3 months. But typically that person in your university will actually observe what you're doing and actually sign it off together with your person in the place of work signing it off as well. Typically, you do have some people that take maybe 3 or 4 years, before they decide to even do their masters or go on to do their Part 3. But any amount of work experience that you've catalogued in your PDRs is good enough. 2 years is the minimum, but you can have a lot more. If you have a lot more, you have a lot more to talk about when you're doing your oral exams in your part 3, and also when you're actually just talking to examiners. So one question I get asked is, how do I talk to my employer about me only working for 1 year? Because you might want to go on to do your master's. Most employers are aware that actually when they're hiring a student that studied architecture, they're only going to be around for a year. So talk about it at the interview. Talk about what programs they have in place. Some employers actually might support you while you're doing your master's. But the key thing is to note that actually there's 2 paths you can take. You can either do the course full-time or you can do it part-time. But one thing to be aware of, architecture is slightly different from other actual courses where the masters only last for 1 year. Actually, with architecture, it lasts for 2 years. So if you're going to do it part-time, it's going to be 3 years long. So that's something to bear in mind. But at least during those 3 years, you could actually be working part-time. And that further adds to your PDRs, your experience that you've had. Whereas if you're doing it full-time, you're going to be back to practically being a broke student. You won't be able to really work in architectural practice because of the amount of days you're going to need to study. And also, you're going to be relegated to actually only being able to work the weekend, which most architectural practices are not open. So thanks for watching. I am going to be posting more content on becoming an architect and the path I'm taking and just key facts. So like, subscribe, comment down below.